God isn't crazy, but he does things that are crazy amazing. And this is the Crazy God Story Podcast. My name is Chris. Today, I've got with me one of my friends from TikTok. Her name is Alexandra Hope Craig. And hope is really what her life has become about. And it surprises, I think, a lot of people that she has hope. She was married for several years, and then in a very, very, very short period of time, unexpectedly lost her husband. She was left as a single mom and just had to figure out how to find hope through that, and how to put back together a life that was not the life that she had envisioned or planned. And just, yeah. So, how are you doing today, Alexandra?
I am very well, thank you, Chris. And I'm happy to share my story with you. It wasn't exactly a happy story to go through, but it all began just a little over 4 years ago. At least whenever, as far as the walking through sickness and health till death do us part, and then walking grief after. But that all began about 4 years ago. And one of my prayers at that time, I was terrified whenever I would say it, but Lord, whatever the outcome is, I just ask that you would help me say it is well with my soul. And with full belief and conviction, I can sincerely say those things now. It is well with my soul. And I'm happy to be with you today.
Wow. And that's really hard to be able to get to a point in your life where you can do that, because it takes faith to be able to say it is well with my soul, when to everybody who's observing your life is probably going, that's like, there's probably people that think that's idiotic that you can have that kind of attitude.
Hmm.
But the reality is that we can have that kind of attitude. It's just not something that comes from ourself through our own strength or own ability.
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, there have been a number of people who, not being believers themselves, have just simply can't relate. And that's, I mean, there's a reason why it says the peace that surpasses understanding, because it is incomprehensible. But,
Yeah.
because we cling to the Prince of Peace himself, that's what we have an abundance of. And it's in the midst of impossible situations where it's like, how can you possibly see any glimmer of light in a room that is just pitch black? How
Yeah.
can you see any amount of color in your life and have any amount of joy whenever it's all just been smited out of your life? I'm like, well, the
Yeah.
Lord in my life, and the hope that I
Yeah.
have in my heart.
And I think that hope is so important. I didn't know your middle name was Hope until like
Hmm.
6 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that's so important. And like one of the things Paul wrote to the Colossians, he had never been to the church and to that church, but he wrote a letter to him, and he says, we've heard of your love and your faith because of your hope. And
Hmm.
that phrase really struck me, because he was saying you have faith and love because you have hope. And it really, that verse hits me, because so much of our ability to live as Christians, to follow Jesus, to get through life, comes from hope. Without hope, you have nothing. So why don't you take us through kind of your husband's name was John.
Hmm.
Why don't you take us through y'all's story? Kind of what you had, what you expected, and then what actually happened, and what you have experienced since then.
Okay. So I will try my best to keep it concise so that you can follow like kind of a bullet point timeline, but give enough detail so that it kind of gives some context to the story. So John and I were married in 2015. And we had been together for a few years before then. So we had a little over 6.5 years together, about 6.5 years together, a little over 3 years of that we're married. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, 4 years ago, around this time, actually just last week, it was a normal morning, and there was no indicator that anything was wrong. So if you ever have one of those situations where you're just sitting there chilling in life, everything is seemingly fine, and then all of a sudden, somebody rips the rug out from underneath of you, and then you're like, falling on your face in the dirt. That's exactly what happened to us that day. So he had been brushing his teeth, and he discovered a lump under his tongue. And it was the size of, like, those midgie Tootsie Rolls,
Yeah.
that
Oh,
it felt like one of those. Yeah, it felt like one of those that was buried in the soft tissue of the floor of his mouth, between the base of his tongue and the back of his teeth. And of course, that doesn't belong there. So we were able to get an appointment with a doctor that day. And in about 2.5 weeks, they did testing, and they couldn't get a definitive diagnosis at first. But then on February 16th, 2018, they gave us a devastating diagnosis. It was called nut midline carcinoma. And at the time, he was one of about 250 cases in documented medical history, the first person in the state of South Carolina to have been diagnosed with it, and only the third in North Carolina. And at Levine Cancer Institute in Charlotte, where he had all this treatment, he was the first patient that they had with this. So I say that to say it was very enigmatic. I mean, there was very little information about it, but the information they did have included that the average survival was about 7 to 9 months, and that there were like single digit survivors. Out of the cases that they have, there were very, very, very few who had durable remission, durable survival. So yeah, he was 37 at the time of diagnosis. I had just turned 29, and he lived a little over 8 months from the date of that diagnosis. And so he went to be with the Lord on October 20th, 2018. My son was just a little over 4. And again, I was 29, and John was 38 at the time that he passed away. So
wow.
that's a lot. There's a whole lot of the journey that's, of course,
And,
filled in there, but that's the
and
timeline of the events.
that's a really condensed version. And, that doesn't include like, I mean, that's just a nuts and bolts like timeline, but that doesn't include the stuff that you really went through, like the feelings and the emotions. Like, I love in the garden. One of the things that I love about Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane,
Hmm.
when he was just saying, Father, if there's any way to make this, go away, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. Seeing, him go through that. And I think we need to see that in Jesus. And I think what I'd like to hear is kind of, you know, I don't want to make you relive anything that you're going, I just don't want
Oh
to.
no, it's
Um,
okay. I'm an open
okay.
book. In fact, we documented the whole thing from start to finish. And of course, there's more. If anybody listening now would like to know more of the in-depth nitty-gritty of what that journey was like, of course, I'll share more with it here now. But it's also there on Facebook as the Candid Craigs, and of course, I
Okay.
share some things
Yeah.
about it on TikTok.
Yeah, and
But yeah,
I definitely, at the end, I want to get how people can connect with you. I want people to be able to do that if they feel like they need to or whatever, and I want to make sure people have the contact information that you want people to have.
of
So,
course, of
but
course. But yes, I am. It doesn't make me uncomfortable in any way
okay,
to share what it was like going through those moments. I don't want to overwhelm with detail, but um, it, you were saying a moment ago, like the realness of Jesus, like saying the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was saying, like, Lord, if there's any way, let this cup pass from me. God, if there's not my will, but yours be done. But like, if there's a way around this, Lord, please show me how we can accomplish your will without having to go through with what I know is immediately before me. And what was immediately after that was, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him and strengthened him.
yeah,
Sometimes we want for our cup to pass. Like, God, please take this away from me. I don't want this cup that's in my hand. And sometimes he's not necessarily going to take the cup away, but he might send you something and pour in it, something to pour in it that you can then drink from, that's going to strengthen you to endure the path that is set before you. Sometimes it's not about him taking away the cup, it's about what he pours in it. And
wow.
that's exactly what Jesus experienced. And because of that, I learned it as it was happening for me, but that's exactly what happened for John and for us, and for Johnny and me.
Not about him taking away the cup, but about him filling it with something that gives you the ability to endure. Wow, I've
Mhm.
never heard that before or connected that with, because like, I mean, you read about, okay, this angel came and strengthened Jesus, but I've never made that connection before. So, it so I mean, obviously you had to have gone through just an immense amount of grief. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say my heart does break for you. Like I
Thank
know
you.
this is past the point. I know that you have probably heard a million people say a million different things, offering condolences and stuff like that. But it's hard to hear something like what you're telling us and not just feel some kind of pain and go, man, that's heartbreaking. You know,
Yeah. And I
but
understand that, and I appreciate everyone's sentiments,
yeah,
and I know, like, it's, even though it's not new information for me, because I mean it's been my life for the last several years, but anytime somebody hears my story, it's new to them.
yeah.
And so of course they're experiencing or hearing of us having experienced that. So no, I completely understand. I appreciate your sentiments just the same.
So here's what I'd like to ask you based
Of
on
course.
what you said. How did God fill your cup to give you the ability to kind of get through this? And was it like an all at once thing where he went, okay, here's what you need to get through this? Or was it like a constant just moving forward and him giving you like small increments, or like what did that look like?
Sometimes it was a combination of both. Um, so while we were going through it, you know, John and I both have family and friends from all over the place, and we had, I mean, quite literally, the people around us, family, friends, and strangers alike, really rallied together and were the very hands and feet of Jesus who carried us through the experience. So that was majorly helpful, while we were going through, because I mean, let me back up just a moment. I know I gave a very brief version of the timeline here, but whenever it all was beginning, I mean, like, again, let me go back for just a moment. um, that lump that he found under his tongue, from the date that he discovered it to the date that we got the diagnosis, it had more than doubled in size, and it had wrapped itself around his jaw. And he went from the day that he discovered it, we had no clue anything was wrong, nothing. There was no indicator, no symptoms, no side effects, no pain, no night sweats, no nothing. Just this lump that just showed up and more than doubled in size. And then all of a sudden they tell us, we need to do something like now. And we recommend doing a radical surgery where they removed the lower right half of his jaw and they replaced it with a portion of bone from his shin, and they reconstructed the floor of his mouth with a skin graft. And they had to reconstruct his face and do radical intervention to remove this malignancy. And even with that radical action, the statistics were still the same. And it was a major thing that happened, came on very quickly, and then there was massive action that also happened very quickly. And it wasn't just the surgery, it was the major recovery, and the feeding tube and the trach, and he couldn't walk, and exorbitant amounts of pain, and physically changing the way that he looked. Just, it was a lot. And it wasn't just, it was painful for him, but it was also like just psychologically, just so many things. And while we were going through that, the Lord provided for us, financially, people bringing us meals, and the things that you might typically associate with somebody going through a really heartbreaking, tumultuous time. But sometimes there were just encouraging words from perfect strangers that just happened to have been exactly how the Lord was speaking to me at that moment. Like, maybe they said something specific that the words or the phrases that they used was exactly what I had just been thinking about. Just different things like that. There was one lady, her name's Dina. She, after John had passed away, I had never met her in person, but she sent me a message that was exactly what I needed to hear, that stilled my heart. And sometimes, whenever the Lord places just a little tug on your heart to say something to somebody, sometimes it might seem like it's nothing to us, but it's everything to them. And so that happened, throughout our journey back, both while he was with me and then in my grief thereafter. Sometimes it was by way of silence, of, moments whenever Johnny had started kindergarten and he was at school, and I was left in the stillness of, what do I do with myself? Like, grief isn't just the loss of the person you love so deeply. It's the loss of familiarity. It's the loss of the plans that you had made together. There are all the secondary losses that you're also grieving. And part of that is having, somebody else in your home. And so sometimes in the deafening silence, of the loneliness is whenever God made himself most real to me. And I grew up with my mom telling me, encouraging me to get in the word, saying that it would come alive to me. And I never really understood what she meant until the stillness and again, the loneliness, where I didn't know what else to do but to turn to scripture. And the words that I had read some of those things before and I had heard some of them before, but in my heartache, the Lord was, it's like the soil of your heart is just that much more accessible and tenderized. And those little seeds could go in there, and then just those little seeds of faith would grow. And it became evident to me how much he was holding me through that process.
Wow. So was there like certain portions of scripture, certain books in the Bible or like passages, or was there things that particularly like helped you through? Like I know some people they're like, man, I got into Psalms and was reading the stuff that David wrote because David suffered
Mm-hmm.
extensively. That was his life.
Yeah.
You know, was there something like that for you, or was it just God took you to like different places that you needed?
It was largely, well, I guess you could say a little bit of both. So, like God being near to the brokenhearted, that he catches all your tears. Not one tear falls outside of his tender, loving care. He catches them in a bottle and holds them close. Of course, that's paraphrasing different verses like from Psalms and such.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. Romans 15:13, I'm sure that's a common verse that people hear, as like maybe a benediction. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may abound in hope. And I remember coming across that verse, and at the time, it was like my hope tank had been thoroughly dried up. And I was like, my head was spinning. And I remember having a head knowledge of hope and knowing that I still had it and that I would have reason to, look forward to good things in the future with hopeful expectation. But at the time, I was like, I was gun shy, if you want to call it that. Like I was, um, what point is there to make plans? Like I can get my hopes up about something and have them crumbling to pieces. Like there was a time whenever I would drop off my son at school and I would be afraid to say, I'll see you later, because I'd be like, I can't promise you that I will see you later, baby. And so, I got, by the power of the Holy Spirit in my life, I was able to get to the point of, I love you and I'll see you at home. And whether that home is physically, where we live, or whether it's home with Jesus, I can trust that all will be well. It just might not necessarily be well according to the world standards, but it doesn't do my heart or anybody else's heart good to just be in fearful of the what ifs. But it does do my heart a whole lot of good to cling to all joy and peace in believing that all will be well by the power of the Holy Spirit. And because of that, we can abound in hope.
Wow. Wow. Man, that's a lot. Do you need a minute?
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
My
Okay.
eyes are a little misty,
What?
but I'm okay.
Yeah, yeah. I had
It's
to.
like an empathy for what my younger self would feel at that time, remembering what that was like. But I'm okay now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had to wipe my eyes a little bit there for a minute because that was. It's really a lot, and I think one thing that I've heard so many people ask this, and I understand why people ask this, and I think that you're probably in a good spot to be able to. You've probably had to wrestle. I'm guessing you've had to wrestle through this question: is how can a good loving God, how can there be a good loving God? How can you believe in a good loving God when something like this happened? Like
Yeah.
how do you reconcile those things? And so many people are like, I wish I could find hope. I wish that I could say it is well with my soul. And people will, hear those phrases like from the Bible, and even people that aren't, Christians or believers or whatever, like they've heard some of those things before. How do you get to the point where you can say God still loves me, and these things that I'm saying, I'm not just going, okay, they're true, but actually saying I believe that they're true. This is what I'm going to live by. You mentioned the Holy Spirit. Like, what does it take to get from like point A of just grief and having doubt in God to going, okay, God is giving me his hope? Like, how do you, that's a
How
more
do
than
you
a question.
reconcile?
So
Oh, that's okay.
sorry.
Yeah, how do you reconcile all of that? No, it's quite all right. So, I mean, and it's a common but understandable and complex thought. Like, why, one, how can you still believe in God whenever something awful like that
Right.
happens? And ultimately, why do bad things happen to good people? And of course, there are, other folks out there who are, I guess they might have way more eloquent, concise ways of explaining it than I do. But the
I,
one
I
thing
think
about it, mhm,
sometimes we don't need eloquent. We just need authenticity. And
authenticity, exactly. Having been there, so
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 don't worry
I,
about
I
giving
agree with
like a
you.
perfect, like Bible school seminary answer. Just
Uh-huh.
w- where it's from your perspective, like just you, just,
Okay.
yeah.
So one, by whose standard of good? See, I've learned, through my own choices and just the Lord revealing, just as much as he's imparted his grace to me, it's like realizing that your own self-righteousness is as good as filthy rags. And so even the most saintly of people here on earth is still awful and wretched in comparison to a good, holy, and perfect God. So that's one thing, is acknowledging his sovereignty and where we fall, like where we fall in line in relation to that. So by whose standards of good to begin with? Because even our best is the worst compared to a good, holy, and perfect sovereign God. So there's that. Another thing is I had to learn to be comfortable, and learning to trust in God is sacrificing your own need for explanations. And that part of his sovereignty is that he is good and he loves us, and we are the crown jewel, the apple of his creation. But he owes us a grand total of nothing, including explanations for why things happen the way that they do. And so part of believing in God is accepting him for who he is, which includes his sovereignty, and knowing where we stand in relation to that. And because of that, we have to be comfortable sacrificing our need for him to give an account. We are the ones who owe him an account, not the other way around. You see, Job, everything that happened in Job's life. I mean, my goodness, if anybody had any reason to squabble and complain and be like, forget you, God, and, chuck the deuces up at him and shake his fist, it was Job.
Yeah.
Um, Now he did his fair share of grumbling. I'm sure he never lost faith, but I'll tell you what, he was wrestling with God through it all. And finally, even with his friends, after the Lord had heard enough of it, he his one, I forget the name of him, but he piped up basically saying, like, hey Job, you might want to consider, you know just pipe down just for a moment. And finally the Lord's like, oh yes, a voice of reason. And so the Lord comes and he goes into like several chapters worth of, who is you? Like, I'm sorry, you're my creation, you're complaining to me? You mean you would contest me to justify yourself? I'm sorry, do you know where the storehouse of the snow is kept? Do you know where the sky begins, where the curtain ends, and where it is pulled back to? Do you know where the mountain goat gives birth? Things like that. Brace yourself like a man. I will ask the questions and you will answer. Is what the Lord said to Job, who was the one who was just suffering. And Job started answering, and God cut him off. He's like, brace yourself like a man. I will ask the questions. You're going to answer me. And so after all that, Job was like, all right, um, woe is me. Like, I will hush up. You are God and I am not. And it was only after that. See, Job never got an explanation for why everything happened the way that it
Nope.
did. He got no explanation. And he didn't know that the Lord was going to restore him. He had no idea.
Right.
But it was only after his heart was bent in humility before God that he hushed up. And was after that moment of humility where he stopped demanding answers, where he stopped basically saying, like, take my life, this is how it's going to be, this is not what I signed up for. It was after he was quiet that the Lord restored him. And the Lord restored his friends by way of Job because of his humility before the Father. And then everything was twofold after that. So part of finding restoration in the Lord is giving up your need for explanations as though he owes us anything, because he
Wow.
doesn't, but we owe him everything.
Yeah. And that I think getting to that place, because like just from listening to you, kind of some of the stuff I'm hearing is, you obviously had to get to a place where you were, you know, gave up that need for explanation, because I know when we go through grief, I mean, there's a few things that happens, if, you know, I know that there's some profanity that comes in there, some four-letter words, some questioning God, you're looking for that explanation,
Hmm.
I would just like to say, anyone who's listening, if you've gone through anything and you've cursed God out or told him you hated him or anything like that, um, that doesn't mean you're not saved anymore. You have not lost your
No,
salvation.
no,
God doesn't get angry because of that. I think his heart actually breaks for us when we're going through suffering. Um,
absolutely. And I'd
and
like to add to that,
yeah,
is that, I mean, if that's where you are, that's where you are. And God loves you where you are, not, and just what you just said, his heart breaks for where you are right now. And even if it's an unpleasant conversation with him, it's still a conversation. It still takes faith to wrestle with God.
yeah,
Even if your heart is in a place that's hardened,
yeah.
that still takes some level of faith. And it's okay if you're not where we are right now. It's okay. This has taken time for me to get here. So I just wanted to say that.
No, 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 no. No, thank you. Please, anytime I'm talking and you want to interject, please do. I want to hear, from you and what you have to say. I know
Oh,
one of
that's
the
gracious of you.
things,
Thank you.
yeah, one of the things that's really helped me a lot through a lot of stuff, is realizing, in John chapter 11, in the story of Lazarus, I can't talk. Lazarus,
Hmm.
the brother of Mary and Martha, he died. Jesus delayed getting there. He could have healed him while he was alive, but he waited. He shows up. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, and Mary and Martha are devastated. And there are people there that are mourning, and everyone's just heartbroken. And Jesus, on the way to the tomb of Lazarus, it says that Jesus wept. Now, Jesus is about to bring Lazarus back to life. He's about to go and raise him from the dead. From Jesus' perspective, Lazarus is only sleeping for a minute. This is only like a 4 day nap, because he knows what he's about to do. And that verse strikes me, that it says Jesus wept, because the language isn't just that, he had a good cry for a minute. It was like his heart broke and he wept. And when I read that, I'm like, why would he cry when he's fixing to go bring this guy back to life? Because he's not crying over the death of Lazarus. But what
Hmm.
strikes me is the response from Lazarus' sisters to Jesus, the way they approached him, Mary and Martha,
Hmm.
because they were devastated and crushed. They were just, their whole world had been absolutely destroyed. And when I look at that story, I see that Jesus, the reason I believe that he wept was because of the pain that Mary and Martha were in. The people that loved
Hmm.
Lazarus, the devastation in their life. And I think that Jesus, like, even when he came to earth to save us from our sins, it was because from all eternity, he looked down. He knew in advance how much sin was going to destroy our life and wreck us. And it broke his heart. And even now, when we're going through things, when you were going through that, I believe
Hmm.
that the Father was looking at you and his heart was just like, he did allow you to go through, just like he allowed Job to go what he went through, or Joseph to go through what he went through, or all of the other people we read about in the Bible that suffered to go through what they went through. I believe that God does allow it. And I like that you said, he doesn't owe us an explanation. You're absolutely right. We can find like some reasons in the Bible, but not the specific reason for everything that we go through. But I love the idea that God is actually brokenhearted for us over the things that we go through. So
Absolutely.
one of the things that I think is so important about your story, though, because, if you're listening to this and you're not seeing it on YouTube, I mean, I asked a minute ago if you needed a minute, because obviously, this is an emotional thing for you. This is not
Hmm.
something where, uh, one of the things like I've learned about grief, I one of the things that happened to me, I lost my cousin 30 years ago in a gun accident. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and there's still, like, I'm farther from that. People say time heals all wounds, but like 5 years ago, one of his sister had posted pictures on Facebook of her children, and it took my breath away, and it just like
Hmm.
it refreshed it. And
Yeah,
um but I dang dadgummit, I had a brain fart and I just
that's
completely
okay.
lost my train of thought. Oh my
Well,
gosh.
grief, well, maybe kind of talking about that moment, I'll give you a chance for it to come back. So grief is kind of funny like that. And, somebody early on in my journey, somebody told me that grief is like a suitcase that you'll always carry with you. And some days it feels like it's filled with feathers. Some days it feels like it's filled with cinder blocks. And I felt both of those. And I also realized in the aftermath that, also tucked away in that suitcase, or the lovingly packaged and carefully tucked in there, are the treasured memories that you have with your loved one. And sometimes you'll have a moment, you'll have the wherewithal and the strength to sit down and open that suitcase and look through the memories. And sometimes it might bring back tears. Sometimes it might bring back the painful memories. Sometimes it might bring back, like I said a little while ago, an empathy for your younger self, of remembering what it was like going through that. And the truth is that you never move on, you move forward. And time in and of itself doesn't necessarily heal all wounds. It's time with both truth and grace administered into it. And sometimes that truth and that grace is allowing yourself to think back and reflect on those memories, and allowing yourself to shed new tears over them. Doesn't mean that you're pining over it. Doesn't mean that you're stuck there. It means that you're allowing yourself to fully appreciate all that experience and that person imparted into your life. You never move on, you move forward. And
Wow.
in time, that suitcase becomes a toolkit that not only do you have your own treasured memories in there, but you have empathy, and you have a relatability that you didn't have before, in order to administer a healing balm to somebody else who has only picked up their luggage, and they haven't traded it in for a suitcase yet.
Wow. You said what I was trying to say, but a lot more eloquently than I ever could have.
It's okay.
Wow. Man,
Well, thank you.
that's amazing. I think one of the things that's so important from your story, though, is the fact that you got to a point where you were able to say things like, okay, it is well with my soul, even though for all intents and purposes and from all appearances, it shouldn't be. And to
Right.
not just to be able to say it, but to actually live that, to have that be the truth in your life instead of something you wish was true in your life. Because I think a lot of people, when they're going through grief and suffering, they want to be able to say something like that, but they don't, and they don't know how, and they
Hmm.
don't have the ability to be able to do that. And you've got this hope that you were saying comes from the Holy Spirit. And you know up again, you've got this loving God in your life, that even though this horrible thing has happened, he doesn't owe you an explanation. But I'm amazed at the way that he has sustained you through it. And
So am I. So am I.
yeah, and
Oh.
and I love that even though we don't know why everything that happens, like I do believe that there's a one of my very good friends that has been through a lot of suffering herself, and she actually just very unexpectedly lost her daughter, her and her
Mm.
husband. And one of the things she says that she is still holding on to, in the midst of that, is that if God allows it to happen, he'll redeem it. And it doesn't mean you always
Hmm.
know how or why,
Right.
but I
Yeah,
believe,
because
and
we
this is
don't.
one of the things I think that's really helped me go through the things that I've gone through, um, the idea that if God allows something to happen in my life, he wants to use it for something. I may not know what, and I may not know in this life, but God wants more people to get into heaven. And
Hmm.
it's hard to wrap my head around that, but I know that he wants to take like the things that I've been through and use it for that end. But
Hmm.
it's
Well,
hard
I
to.
mean, the story of Joseph is a good illustration for that. And I was just reading about this recently. Um, is that okay? So I forget which chapter it is, but um, whenever Joseph's brothers, they threw him in the pit, right? And they were getting ready to sell him into slavery. The ones who came along that they sold him to were the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites are the descendants of Ishmael, who is the result of Abraham and Sarah trying to fulfill God's promises for themselves.
Yeah.
Right now, he was not the one that was going to be the fulfillment of God's promise. He was not going to be the one that was the chosen child. But God used that as a way of provision. So the Ishmaelites are the ones who took Joseph into slavery and positioned Joseph to be in Egypt, where he could then prevent his family from dying of starvation. And Judah was one of those brothers, and it was from the line of Judah that Jesus came to be. Well, of course, he was by way of Mary, but Mary married into Joseph. So Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, the carpenter, was a descendant of Judah, who was prevented from death by starvation by Joseph, because he was in a position to prevent that from happening because of being sold in slavery to the Ishmaelites. And so it was like God using all things for the good of those who love him and who are called according to their purposes. God, who Jehovah Jireh, who sees ahead and makes provision. He allowed Abraham and Sarah to bring Ishmael into the world by way of Hagar. And then all of this down the road is exactly what he used to put bread into their bellies, to preserve the line of Jesus and to fulfill prophecy.
Wow. You've been thinking about that for a minute, huh?
Mm-hmm. And that one, I just realized that last week. I was like, the Ishmaelites, wait a second. Talk about God using things for his glory and our good.
Yeah, and I'm reading through Genesis right now, and I just read that part of Genesis, and like I'd thought of some of that, but I hadn't thought about that connection with the Ishmaelites and the role that they played. And wow, man, that's amazing. This is just, your story amazes me, because I think there's so many people that people don't know how to find hope. Even sometimes as Christians, we're going, how do I find hope? How do I
Mm-hmm.
take this thing that's happened, and wrap it around, wrap hope around it and find hope in it. And I'm amazed at the way that you've been able to do that. And, one of the things I think you said, and I think this is important. And again, so much of our, what God is looking for from us is faith, even when it doesn't make sense to us or to anybody else, but to, I think, crack your Bible open and to start
Mm-hmm.
going, okay, God, where are you at in this? And then for him to respond to you and
Mm-hmm.
to open things up to you. Because one of the things that I've found with the Bible is, a lot of times what we read, it's God directing us to what we need when we need it, and
Absolutely.
Hebrews 11:6, it's one of my favorite verses. It says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. For those who come to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. And I think sometimes, and in your case, diligently seeking him wasn't like, okay, God, here we are. It was, God, what in the F is going on? I
Mm-hmm.
need you. And just cracking your Bible open,
Mm-hmm.
and
And that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's not necessarily like finding hope. That might scare some people, like, where do I even begin? Like, I don't even have the strength to start looking. Like, what do you want me to do? Go get a set of binoculars, perhaps a magnifying glass, like, I don't have the strength to lift all that. And sometimes it's not a matter of finding it. It's a matter of just having just the tiniest little bit of faith to go to the source of it. And just be like, Lord, I don't even know where to start. Just, here I am. Just, it says, draw near to me, and I will draw near to him, and he will draw near to you. And just simply, like you said a moment ago, cracking your Bible and just going to the source.
Yeah.
And allowing that source to find you and to draw you toward himself, and allow him to reveal to you who he is by the living, breathing word that he spoke and made available to us. That's how we get to know him for who he is by reading what he said and having the faith to take him at his word. That's another thing, is that in John I can't remember the chapter and verse, but it's where, whenever Jesus was telling his disciples of what was going to be coming up and happening to him, that he was going to be taken away. He's like, I'll go away for a little while, but then he's going to come back and he's going to go away. And then you guys are going to grieve and whatever else, but you'll be able to rest in the hope that is before you. And they're like, what is he talking about? Like, they didn't know what was coming. And he didn't, he said, the reason I tell you this so that you will have faith, or that you will have peace. I tell you these things so that you will have peace. And one might say, why? You mean to tell me you're saying you're going to go away, and all these things, like we're going to suffer at the hands of man, all this stuff. You're saying that's going to be peaceful, peace giving? You done lost your mind. He's like, no. The reason he didn't say that because he was going to keep it from happening. He told those things to them so that when they did happen, they would be able to think back what Jesus had said, and they would know, you know what? He said this was going to happen. And because I can take him at his word for this, I can take him at his word that I have a hope and a future in him because he goes before the Father. And I can take him at his word. And the question is, are we going to have just the teeniest amounts of faith to not just take him at his word, but meet him at his word, go to it so that we can hear what his word says?
Yeah. One of my favorite verses is in Isaiah. I think it's 26:3 or 23:6. I always get it backwards, but it says, "You will keep him in perfect peace, him whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts you." I'm reading out of the New King James. Different translations say it different, but
It's okay.
that verse has really helped me through a lot of stuff because it's saying God gives us peace when our mind is fixed on Him and we learn to trust Him by focusing on Him. And I know this kind of sounds cliche, but it's something that's helped me through some things, and that's to, when we worship God or we focus on God, He's the problem solver. He's the solution. He's the
Mm-hmm.
one that can bring us hope. Like, not this thing, not necessarily that we're looking for hope, like you said, but sometimes we find hope in Him. But when we focus on Him, it, um, kind of takes our focus off of our big, very giant looking problems onto and focuses on the God who's much bigger. And we realize that sometimes, the solution to our problems isn't them being resolved in the way that we want, but just in going back to what you said, setting aside, sacrificing our need for an explanation and realizing that God is sovereign, that He does love us, and that nothing that happens in our life, and this is nothing that happens in our life is meaningless or purposeless, and that everything, if God allows you to go through something, He's got a reason He's allowing you to go through it, even if you don't realize it, even if you don't recognize it or know what it is. There's a
Mm-hmm.
reason. So, all right, I
Absolutely.
something you had brought up, and this was something, a new perspective I've never heard on something before. And man, the things you're saying, I'm loving this because I think there's things you're saying that people need to hear. There's things you're saying that I needed to hear, um, that I've never heard before, and I'm just like, oh, this is good. Um,
That's very
you're
kind
gonna
of you.
you're
Thank you.
you're helping me to deal with some of my own trauma and my own grief, through this. So this is, I love this. But one of the things that people will do, that they're very well meaning, they're very well intended. They see you going through something, and you've lost a husband, and so someone may say something like, everything happens for a reason. God will never give us more than we can handle. God needed another angel. He gives His strongest warriors the toughest battles. People will, or I understand what you're going through. And, people say things to us when we're in grief, when we are in suffering. And, one of the things you said was that there were people that said things to you that you needed to hear that were important. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people, what they say, it actually marginalizes and diminishes, like demeans what we're going through. And people with good intentions, I think, don't always realize that what they say is actually very, very more hurtful and more harmful than it is good. So can you
Mm-hmm.
kind of talk to us about things that people, and you don't have to say like exactly what people have said, but what people have, about types of things people have said that are good, and things that people have said that are wacky. Because one last thing real quick before I turn it over to you.
Mhm.
One of the I can't remember where this is at right off. I wish I could remember the reference, but one of the things that Paul said, he said, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, or mourn with those who mourn. And I think sometimes we don't need to have an answer for somebody. We need to be able to just sit down with somebody and shut up, and
Mhm.
just be present, and
Yeah.
so
And sometimes it can be a tough balance to find, because sometimes their presence is just all that's needed, depending on kind of where you are in your grief journey. I mean, because it ebbs and flows. I mean, it's like, it really is. It's like waves, it kind of, you have up, you
right.
have down. And sometimes you can be seemingly okay one minute, and then a pool of water works the next. Um, and then sometimes saying nothing is actually worse, because sometimes saying nothing at all out of fear of saying the wrong thing it's almost like pretending as though it didn't happen, and causing that loved or that person to almost go through loss again, or to pretend that that person only lived inside of their head. Particularly if it's like several months later, whenever maybe you haven't gone through something, and do you think to yourself, this person should have moved on by
Oh,
now? And then, or if somebody's uncomfortable with another person maybe sharing a memory or talking about their experience through grief, and if you yourself are in a position where you haven't actually gone through something like that yourself, again, you feel as though it's not appropriate for this person to be talking about this anymore, because they should have moved on by now. And the reality is that, again, to disallow somebody from sharing their experience is to make them pretend as though that loved one only lived in their head, as though the difference that they made is only something to be carried but never shared, as though their box of memories, their treasure chest, is just something that they have to bear the weight of, but that they can't set it down and be like, hey, look what I learned through this experience.
yeah.
So sometimes saying nothing and expecting somebody else to say nothing is worse. So whenever grief is a little bit more fresh, um, there were a number of things that people have said. And now, first of all, well, not first of all, but let me pause for just a moment. Um, Anybody who has ever said anything with the intention of being supportive and kind, I fault nobody for the intent of their heart, because it's sticky. Death is not exactly something that everybody goes around talking about all joyfully all the time. It's not like there are grief support classes that we've all gone through and we all know what to do.
Right.
None of us have died. So how do we all know how to truly relate to it?
Wow. Yeah.
So, there's grace for the grieving heart, and also for those who are trying to support the grieving heart. So I just wanted to say that there, kind of a disclaimer, if you will. But with that in mind, whenever you know better, then hopefully there can be an equipping for you to do better. And so saying things like, I know how you feel, even if you have gone through a carbon copy experience, like let's say somebody has lost their spouse, or like me having lost my spouse, I would not tell somebody else who has also just lost their spouse that I know how you feel. Because even though we may have lost the same role in our lives, we don't know all the individual nuances that are surrounding the situation. We don't know what level of closure that there was or what there wasn't. We don't know what words were left unsaid. We don't know what business was left unfinished. We don't know what dreams they had together that are left unfulfilled. We don't know. We don't know what the last word that person breathed before they parted ways. We don't know. We don't know what level of provision they do and what they don't have. We don't know what other stressors they might have going on in their life. So we cannot truly say, I know how you feel, because we don't. Now, one might say, oh, they're just trying their best. They're just saying that because they've gone through a similar loss. And they have, yes. But the reality is whenever somebody is grieving, and especially when forever it's fresh, there is a heightened level of sensitivity. And even if you yourself, as somebody who's trying to support, is not thinking of all these things, that person may well be. And they might think to yourself, like, how can you possibly? I mean, I remember sitting in the grocery store, or sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store one time, whenever everything was all beginning around this time 4 years ago. And I remember sitting there watching people go in and out of the store like, how dare you go about a normal day as though everything is fine. Like, I wish I could be you sitting in ignorance being bliss. I wish I didn't have to be sitting here waiting for a phone call from the doctor to give us test results. So I say that to say that there's a heightened level of sensitivity for something that seems like it's totally fine, perfectly normal and understandable to somebody else is not perfectly normal and understandable to somebody who is going through fresh, painful grief.
Wow.
And because of that, it's important for us to be mindful of how hypersensitive how the level of sensitivity that somebody could be receiving a perfectly well-intended, harmless phrase, and what damage that could possibly do if you don't say it with an awareness.
Wow.
So that's one thing. I know how you feel. That one drives me bonkers, quite honestly. Like, no, you're lying, and let's not lie to ourselves.
Wow.
So even though people mean well.
Yeah. So when I had said, when I talked about like weep with those who weep and sometimes sitting in silence, like I hadn't even thought about what you were talking about. And that's something that's very real. Like, well, first of all, like what I was talking about is sometimes when somebody is going through something, like you need to sit with them and like enter into their grief and actually like acknowledging it and stuff, and being a presence that's like supportive of whatever they're going through, because sometimes when someone is grieving, we don't need to say anything. We need to let that person just talk and get
Mm-hmm.
everything off of their chest. But yeah, one of the things I've experienced as I've gone through things, and my family has, is you're still doing that. You're still going through that. You're still, you know, and I'm like, there's not an expiration date on grief. There's not an
Right.
expiration date on suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And
And there's no graduation date either. So it's
yeah,
not like something that you work yourself through and you get a pat on the back and a gold star and here's your diploma. No, it's not like
and
that.
and it's there's this expression that someone I know says, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. Things that happen to us, you know, it's amazing how one event can radically, permanently, unreparably affect the course of your life and other people's lives. And so when something happens, you can keep looking at how different, back to that one event, and oh my gosh, this is a result of that. This is that, I mean, it's like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't end. And so for people to think that, okay, this person needs to be over that, is just like, eh, I mean, people have got to grieve in their own way. And like you said, no
Mm-hmm.
one's experience is exactly the same, because no two people are, exactly the same. And, even somebody who had been married for 3.5 years, that had a child and lost their spouse like that, that had
Mm-hmm.
even the same disease. Yeah, there's so many other variables, and you're
Mm-hmm.
in different, yeah, oh my gosh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And not just that, but like also the condition of your heart at that time too.
Yeah.
Just like where somebody is in relation to, these types of perspectives. And of course, I had some level of head knowledge of these things. Back whenever all that was going on, it was all like, oh my goodness, this is the type of stuff that I've heard of happening before. And this is the kind of thing that people lose their faith over. And I remember thinking to myself, Lord, this is the kind of thing that, yeah, might shake me to my core. And I don't want to be one of the ones that hardens my heart and turns away from you. So please protect me from that. And boy, has he. It hasn't been an easy process. Like, and kind of an illustration that comes to mind for this is whenever I was a kid, my dad always kept a garden, and I'd be out there as a trusty little assistant, and he always rented this rototiller, and it was this giant plow looking thing that has these big old blades that would just barrel through the soil. And if that soil had feelings, that must have hurt a whole lot, because it had to churn the hard soil and have to pick out the stones and get rid of the roots, and and prepare the soil to receive not just the seeds but the fertilizer and anything else that my dad added in there. But if he had not gone through that process, and if he had just thrown the manure out there, it would have stunk to high heaven, and then it would have dried up, and that would have been useless. And not just that, but the seeds themselves, if he had just put them on the untilled ground, they would have either been plucked up and eaten by small woodland creatures and birds, or they would have dried up and never taken root. Maybe a couple here and there, but maybe that would have been an accident. But it's going to be a much more plentiful harvest if you allow the soil of your heart to be churned and rototilled, to pluck out the stones, to get rid of the roots, to get rid of the things that don't belong there, to get rid of the things that will prevent the seeds from growing the way that they are intended to grow. And whenever you have your soil of your heart receptive to the very thing that can nourish your life and your heart, then it can bring forth a harvest of righteousness. Because if you harden your heart and you see dry, arid soil, and then the water that can fix the situation, it repels the very thing that could be the solution. But if you allow the things that come up in your life that knock you off onto your back, that completely tear you apart, sometimes it's not tearing you apart, it's just preparing you for what you're meant to bring forth into this world. So the condition of your heart and the choices that you make and how you keep your heart can make a big difference in the level of reach that you have in your own life, and the seeds that you can bear and the fruit that you can bear that might nourish somebody else's life.
Wow. Man, thank you for sharing that. Wow. Man,
You're welcome.
it's just a lot because so often, I mean, we look at the world that we're in and it is full of suffering. I mean, I mean, if you watch the news or you watch TikTok, for crying out loud, it's
Mm-hmm.
just people are trying to, make heads or tails of what's going on. People are looking at the world, the state that we're in, going, what's going on? Where do I find hope? And the thing that the only place I've ever found hope is in Jesus, in eternity, and knowing that I watch a lot of, my wife likes to watch a lot of these shows that's like, serial killers or, people that snap or, and the thing that I always look at with those is there's this driving force behind it of trying to figure out why did this person do this? Why did this person become a cannibalistic serial killer and eat 43 people? Really, like, we want to understand the why, people do things the way that they do. We're driven to, and I kind of came to the conclusion, well, people are sinful. We're sinful by nature. So, it just shows up a whole lot worse to us in some of these people. But we've got to be able to turn over that need for an explanation, and there's a lot of peace in that. And I kind of go to this one thing. This is I think different things in the Bible help different people going through different things. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's like one passage that, like, okay, anybody that's suffering is going to read this one passage and it's going to bring them a ton of comfort. It's different for everybody, but this is for me as I've gone through some of the things that I've gone through. It's at the end of Revelation. It's in Revelation 21, when it's at the end of everything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we are in eternity with God, and this is just kind of gave me a lot of hope because I'm like, I've gone through so much suffering in my life, which has been completely different than what you've been through, but I needed hope. And one time I read this and God was like, ever told, for me, the truth was that, and I think this is a biblical truth, everything that he's allowing me to go through is building to this point to get more people to this point. So I'm going to read the
Mm-hmm.
first 5 verses of Revelation 21. And this is the Apostle John, the disciple of Jesus, had this vision. Revelation is a vision that Jesus gave him. He says, now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth had passed away also. There was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with men. He will be with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more
Mm-hmm.
death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There will be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm having my moment because of what that passage means for me in my life and the way that God really brought healing to me, because I went through that and I still struggle with that, because I know you said, you've got to sacrifice your need for explanation, but like I've done that, but I still go back to it. Like I haven't put those words to it, but that's such a beautiful way to look at it, right? I
Right. Just
love,
he wipes the tears away.
yeah,
Behold, I'm making all things new.
yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
I just, but that passage, it, for me, it's God just keeps telling me, okay, yeah, you're in pain, you're hurting, you're watching these people that you love go through this stuff, and there's nothing you can do about it. And kind of, I had this vision, like this is kind of the way, like I look at my life sometimes. It's like I'm going through life with people that I care about, and we stepped on a landmine, it blew up, and I am just watching people bleed out. I'm completely paralyzed, unable to do anything, and I'm begging and pleading for something to happen. Like I have no ability to do things for these people that I love. And then I read that passage, and that was
Mm-hmm.
just where I was really at for a long time. I just felt radically helpless to do anything. And I read that passage, and God was like, yeah, you can't do anything, but trust me, because I'm using what you're in, what you're going through, and more people are going to experience this than right before that passage is people being sent to the lake of fire for all eternity. And God was like, I don't want people there. So I'm going to let you go through this now so that I can get more people out of that and get them
Mm-hmm.
into this no more pain or sorrow or suffering and be with them for in paradise for eternity. So, yeah. Anyways,
Absolutely.
so one of the things that I just randomly did one day on the podcast, I think I actually started like on the second episode, was here's what I want to do now. I want to give you the chance to just say what's in your heart, say whatever you want. Just, I'm not going to ask a question or topic or anything like that. Just if you can say, one other thing to everybody or 10 other things or whatever, if you've got more stuff that you feel like people need to hear, I want to hear it.
Oh, goodness. Oh, well, there are a couple of illustrations. I mean, I've shared some of these things probably, in a TikTok video here and there, but a couple comforting illustrations that the Lord has kind of just laid on my heart, or one um, is yarn. So I'm a novice, but I crochet a little bit. And so I remember I was crocheting a scarf for my son's teacher. And actually, I ended up never finishing said scarf, but it did bring about this illustration. And in the quiet of the morning, I had just taken my son to school, and my half crocheted scarf was sitting on the table with a ball of yarn. And I was just sitting there drinking my coffee, and I was looking at it. And my crochet hook was kind of mid stitch or whatever. And it was kind of, just laying there. And if you've ever seen a skein or skein of yarn, however you say it, whenever you take them from the craft store, they're like perfectly wound up in this immaculate form. And there's like no way to get it back to that form once it comes unraveled. And I remember sitting there in the quiet thinking to myself, boy, again, just like the soil, if it had feelings, if this yarn had feelings, it would feel like its life was just completely falling apart. Like there's no way it could go back to how it had just been raveled in the comfort of, the company of the rest of the yarn. And I thought, like, boy, it would just feel like it's falling apart and it's just useless. But then it dawned on me, like, but by which perspective? If you're looking back at what once was, and you're seeing your life as being unraveled, that's going to bring a sense of hopelessness. But if you turn the other way and you realize that there's a crochet hook that is in your midst, and that there's a hand of a master craftsman that is not just allowing your life to be unraveled, he's purposefully taking the yarn of your life and weaving it ever so carefully into something more beautiful, something more useful, something more purposeful that can warm the heart and bless the soul and warm the neck of somebody else. And how much more incredible is that than the comfort of being wound in a factory set skein of yarn? So you can choose to see your life as falling apart and coming unraveled, or you can choose to look the other way and trust that the Lord is weaving your life into something so much more beautiful than what you could ever imagine. And no one stitch is more important and more beautiful than the other. All of it fits into the great and marvelous works that are the plans that he has for you. And it all fits together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. It's for your good and his glory.
Wow. That's really good. Oh my gosh. Wow, man. That's such a wow. I just that's amazing. I'm just
Thank you.
I'm kind of caught, like I'm kind of speechless at that, and I'm just, you can't have dead air. So, I'm thinking about that, and the whole time, you were talking about that, I kind of got to this point where I was thinking about, you know, as that thing is coming unraveled, that skein of yarn, and you're talking about like the thing that looks kind of like a oval, right?
Yeah, like those
And
perfectly wound skeins. I have skeins.
yeah,
It's Skein. I forget
right,
how it's pronounced. But yeah, those things that are perfectly woven. Woo, it this way, and then you find an end, and it just comes unraveled. And there's no way to replicate that
yeah,
unless you go back to the factory.
yeah.
Hmm.
But I just keep I was thinking about that, as you're making that scarf, and you said you haven't finished it, and that
Yeah.
doesn't matter. You know, I don't think the
Maybe I
teachers
started it. Maybe it was all for this purpose anyway. But
maybe.
he's in second grade now, so I'm sorry, Mrs. Balding. You never got your scarf.
Yeah, oh well. Did she know she was supposed to get it?
No, maybe
Okay.
she does now. But
Yeah. But the thing that really hit me was, that scarf that you're making, that thing of yarn, it's come apart. It's not what it was. It's been, torn apart as you're making it into something, but it has no idea what it's going to be when you start out. And
exactly.
and I know that you're still, 4 years later, you're still figuring life out. You don't have all the
Hmm.
answers. I mean, you
No,
sound
I
like you
sure
do.
don't.
And I mean, I listened to this today, and I'm like blown away because you've gone through grief a lot better than I have. You have, you know,
No, that's kind of you to say.
well, no,
But it's just a different path. That's all. Just a
yeah,
different part in each other's journey.
yeah, absolutely. One of the things I try and tell people, and I mentioned this before to you, is I tell people, don't compare your grief to other people. Like, when
Hmm.
you see someone that's going through something, it may be look worse than what you're going through. But again, kind of like what you said, you really don't know what somebody else is going through, and your grief is real. So never
Hmm.
compare like your grief to anybody else's. Your
Right.
grief is 100% real and valid, and it freaking hurts.
Yes. It's
And
like a fingerprint. Like you and I both have fingerprints, but they're vastly different than one another.
yeah,
You know, if you go look it up in the database, it's only going to identify one person, but they're both fingerprints. So they're in a similar category, but they're different.
well, and it's not even just that they're different because, everyone's born with a different fingerprint, but like I was a mechanic for like 20 years. My hands are really rough and callous. My fingerprints are probably harder to take than yours are. I mean, there's all of mine are not the same as they used to be because I mean, my hands are like full of scars. I've got like 40 scars on my hands, nicks and
Mm.
things like that. And I don't know. That just, there's so many things that get us to where it's just different. So, but yeah, oh my
Hmm.
gosh. So, I want to, if there's anything else you want to say, I really want to give you the opportunity to say it. Or if you feel like, okay, man, we're at a good spot. I'm happy to end. I just feel like this is such a big topic, such a big thing, when you talk about
Hmm.
grief and suffering, and it's like this thing that, um, a topic you probably can never exhaust. Um, and, you've been healed by God in ways that I haven't. And I'm sure that I've been healed by God in ways that other people haven't. And,
Hmm.
um, but, yeah, I just feel like there could be so much more to say, but I feel like we're at a good spot. Unless you have anything else you want to share, I definitely want you to be able to.
Well, that's very kind of you to keep the floor open. I'm sure there's plenty more that I could say, but the one encouragement I have is just to for the person who's looking for hope, and you're looking for a formula, or you're looking for a recipe to follow that you can just hurry up and get past where you are to feeling you know just better. um, just one breath at a time. That's nothing new. That's not a revolutionary concept, but just one breath at a time. I just made a TikTok about this. Yesterday, I just posted it earlier. Is that my son was telling me the other day? He's 7.5 years old, and he wants to go skydiving. He said, but he can't go until I'm 18. I said, well, yeah, that's a reasonable restriction. But I was trying to explain to him, why, and I said, well, there's a lot to understand. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of responsibility that comes from it. Um, and so, but we got in the car. We were on our way home from the gym, and I got in the car, and then he was crying. So what's the matter? Why are you crying? He's like, because I want to go skydiving. And he had full blown tears coming down his little rosy cheeks because he wants to go skydiving, but he doesn't have to wait. Doesn't want to have to wait until he's 18. I said, oh, baby, I'm so sorry you're feeling disappointed. I understand it's not what you want to hear, but there's a lot that you need to understand. There's a lot of growth that has to take place between now and then. And I wouldn't be a very loving mommy or responsible mommy if I allowed you to go ahead and feel the invigorating experience of skydiving and feeling the wind on your face and seeing the mountains below you. It wouldn't be very responsible of me as a mommy. And so I encourage you to not rush yourself and wish yourself to a place where you want to be while negating the growth that needs to take place where you are now. Because the Lord will reveal himself to you through each breath that you take. And you one day will be able to look back, and you will be able to see where you came from and be able to say, it's only by God's grace that I made it here. And I can say it is well with my soul. Even if you don't believe that for yourself right now, I believe it for you. And I can speak from firsthand experience that it's true.
Wow. Wow. And I think one last thing I would just want to put in, going back to the saying it as well with my soul and being at that spot. One of the things you had said earlier was, you've seen people fall away from faith when they go through things like this, or other things, and you told God, I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be one of those people. And I think sometimes I love that we can be honest with God. Like he sees inside of us. One of the things that I got recently from the story of Abraham and Sarah was, uh, God showed up with two angels, told them, y'all are going to have a kid, a year from now. And in her heart, she laughed. It says in Genesis that in her heart, she laughed, and God knew that. And he said, why did you laugh? Because she laughed in disbelief. God said,
Mm-hmm.
why did you laugh? Why did you disbelieve? And she said, I didn't. And God argued, they had gotten into this argument, and God is like, you did. He sees what's
Like,
in our
yeah,
heart.
you did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I think is important is for us to just be able to be honest with God, and to realize he can see what you're going through. He can see your anger, your hurt, your, all that stuff. And to be able to say, here's where I'm at. I don't know how to get past this, to be honest with where you're at. But,
Mm-hmm. And you
because
can trust him with all those things too, even if
yes,
it is anger and frustration.
yeah.
Like,
And
even if it might look ugly and messy, you can take those things and still offer those up to God, because I'll tell you what, a life preserver fits around you a whole lot better if your arms are up. Even if it means that they're filled with stuff that you don't like, you can give it to him, and he'll take it and throw it away and hold you up.
wow, wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. All right. So, Alexandra, I can't thank you enough for being on here today. there's people that need to hear this stuff because they don't know how to get, you know, past where they're at. And it really
Mhm.
is just the hope we have in God. And like you said, it's not
Mhm.
necessarily something that you're just going to find. Sometimes it is just take a step of faith, even if it is the most tiny, minuscule. Jesus said, faith the size of a mustard seed. I mean, just any act of faith, and God responds to that. And he was like, here you go. Here's some hope. You know, it wasn't something where you were
Mhm.
like, give me hope, God. But you were like,
Mhm.
you know, so how can people connect with you? Where they find you? I know you had mentioned Facebook. I found you on TikTok, or you,
Mhm.
and so how can people connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. So on TikTok, my handle is Alexandra Hope Craig with an underscore in between each one, Alexandra underscore Hope underscore Craig. And then that's also my website, alexandrahopecraig.com. You can connect by way of email on there. I'm working on a book that's called Prayers and Devotions for the Grieving Heart. That it will, I don't know an exact date of when it will be available, but if anybody would like to, request to, be alerted when it is, you can connect by way of email on my website. Um, and let's see, on Facebook, if you are interested in learning more about the journey itself of what we went through, it was the we was it random, relatable, and real. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. But we're on Facebook as the Candid Craigs, where you can see that journey playing out in real time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I will get all of that stuff and I will put it in the description of the podcast, wherever you're getting this. So everybody will be able to connect with you. This has been the Crazy God Story podcast. My name is Chris. You can find this on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, and Apple. It's free on all those locations. It's also on, oh my gosh, I just drew a blank. I say this all the time. It's on oh my gosh, I'm
It's okay.
Patreon. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe I couldn't get that out. It's on Patreon. It's a subscription based on Patreon. That's I've had people that are like, I want to support you, so I've got it there as a subscription based. You get Crazy God Story merchandise if you sign up for it there, or get it free anywhere else. So, anyways, y'all have a good afternoon. Thanks for being here, Alexandra.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.